on lead service line replacement funding program at the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality and Division of Water Infrastructure. If we could please do a quick sound check. If everybody can see us, just put in the chat that you can hear fine. That would be great. We are recording this webinar and we'll be posting the recording as well as the PowerPoint slides on the website in about a week's time. Thank you. We receive enough messages to say that we can hear, that you all can hear us. Thank you so much for that. My name is Shadi Eskaf. I'm the director of the Division of Water Infrastructure, and I'm joined today by my colleagues, John Risgaards, the SRF section chief, as well as David Giacchini, who is the drinking water supervisor and lead for lead service line funding. You'll also probably hear in the room Jen Haney and Kathy Ackroyd, who are attending as well. Again, we appreciate everybody's time to listen to this webinar on lead service line replacement. Just quick logistics. We will be presenting for about 45 minutes and have hopefully about 15 minutes for Q&A. Total webinar time will be 1 hour, so from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock. If you have questions along the way, please feel free to share your questions in the chat box. We will be tracking the questions in chat and we'll try to respond to them at the end of the webinar after the presentation. I'm going to turn off my webcam now and start the presentation. So the lead service line funding that we are receiving and we are excited to be administering now is coming from the November 2021 Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act that Congress has passed, which is otherwise known as a bipartisan infrastructure law. That law had appropriated $15 billion nationwide for 5 fiscal years, specifically for the purpose of inventorying and replacing lead service lines. The national goal really is to try to find every single lead service line in the country and to remove it from use. So that's the main goal. A lot of the water systems right now are in the process of identifying whether or not they have lead service lines, and the funds can be used to help with that effort as well. We'll go into some of the details about what you can or cannot do with these funds as well. Out of the $15 billion nationwide, North Carolina is eligible to receive up to about $87 million per year. And that's all dependent on the project needs and the demand within the state, as well as the state allotments that's determined by US EPA. And EPA has already determined the first 2 years out of the 5 years of allotments. And again, we'll go over that in a second. To introduce real quick what we mean by lead service lines. Service lines are what you have, the water lines that connect the distribution system, the main that goes along the street, or the distribution line that goes along the street to the house. So a service line is what you see in that box at the bottom of the image right there. It's what connects the water line to the house, and the funds can be used to replace those lines and the connectors between the water main or the water distribution line and that service line. So connectors as well as the service lines. That is what this funding can be used for. It cannot be used for indoor plumbing. Anything that's inside the house cannot be replaced using lead service line replacement funding, which means cannot be used to replace faucets that may contain lead or indoor plumbing that might have lead solder as well. If there are galvanized pipes, you can replace galvanized pipes if it's downstream of lead components, only if that's in the service line as well. Here are some images of what service lines look like. The image on the left is it could be any type of service line. The one on the right actually comes from the Cape Fear Public Utility Authority that shows a service line that was a galvanized service line that was downstream of a lead gooseneck. So this funding can be used to replace both the service lines themselves, those pipes in the ground, as well as goosenecks and pigtails, those connectors that connect that service line to the distribution line. The funding is being administered through the state revolving fund. So the bipartisan infrastructure law provides this funding through the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, which is a program that we have been administering for many years now. And who's eligible to apply for these funds and to receive these funds are local government units, nonprofit water corporations, as well as investor-owned water utilities. The allotment that I mentioned earlier is split into program management uses, set-asides, as well as project funding. So a portion of the allotment, portion of that 87 million will be used for some set-aside activities, the rest being made available for project funding. Set-aside activities includes project management, as well as providing direct assistance to help water systems, especially small water systems, conduct and complete inventory. So outside of the project funding and a competitive round of applications, we're going to try to provide some of this funding directly to help systems with inventory assistance. Project funding is going to be provided in low interest loans as well as principal forgiveness. I'll be leaving my colleagues to explain what that looks like. The capitalization grants that we have been allotted, or the amounts have been allotted to North Carolina, is what you see on the screen here in the second column. 87 million in the first 2 years of the 5-year window. North Carolina has not yet applied for these 2 years of funding, and that's what we're working towards. So we'll be presenting what our next steps are, but we're looking to receive up to $87 million in that first year. Again, that all depends on the project needs and the project demands for this state. The actual funding will depend on what we have in terms of projects. The allotments for the last 3 years of the bipartisan infrastructure law funding will be determined by US EPA in future years. Before I pass it on to my colleagues, last few key points just on the big picture side. All public water systems must conduct inventories of lead service lines by October 16, 2024. So that's the lead and copper revised rule that requires every public water system to complete their preliminary inventories by October 2024. This funding can help those systems that are trying to conduct those inventories or complete those inventories. That's one of the goals of this funding, but it's not the only goal. Again, the funding is really there to help identify and to replace, to remove completely all those lead service lines in the country. That's what we're working towards. Replacing lead service lines has always been an eligible project expense under the base or the regular drinking water state revolving fund program, among other types of funding programs that we have available in North Carolina. What we cannot fund with the lead service line replacement funding, we can potentially fund with the drinking water state revolving fund as well. So keep in mind that there's other funding beyond just the 87 million that we're talking about in this webinar. But specifically, this lead service line funding is dedicated to replacements and identifying and replacing lead service lines. So the benefit or the advantage of having the lead service line replacement funding is that it's a dedicated source specifically for that one activity, and it's not for everything else that is eligible under the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. Where we are in the process right now is that we have developed a project solicitation process by which local government units, nonprofit water corporations, and investor-owned utilities could indicate to the department project needs and interest in applying for lead service line replacement funding. That project solicitation form has been active since, I think, February. It's still available. This is a currently active process. There is no hard deadline to apply for or to provide that project solicitation form. So if you still have projects, you have not missed a deadline, you have not missed a window, please submit that project solicitation to us. So we have that project solicitation process developed, and we've also developed and approved a priority rating system through the State Water Infrastructure Authority. The rating system determines how the applications for funding will be determined or how will be scored and prioritized so that the funds that are available are provided to applications based on the highest scoring applicants first. We're also in the process of considering comments received during the March 7th to the April 7th public comment period. So we had provided a draft intended use plan and rating system to the public in that window and asked for public comments. We received quite a few comments, and we really appreciate everybody who submitted comments there were a lot of great comments that were provided to us. We've addressed some of them through the priority rating system. Other comments that we received really target some of the things that are in the intended use plan. The intended use plan is what we developed, the plan that we have are developing to determine how we would administer this funding. So we're in the process of, again, looking through those comments, and information has been provided to us, as well as information that we've gleaned from project solicitations that you've all submitted to us so far, so that we could finalize the intended use plan. And then our next steps, which I think John will be talking about at the very end of the webinar, is we're going to be converting the project solicitations into applications for funding, and then submit to EPA the capitalization grant application, which includes a project list and the finalized intended use plan. So we're working to do that by July 2023, so that funding awards could then be made to those who are seeking these funds. And with that, I'll pass it on to John Risgaards to talk about the program.
All right, thanks, Shadi. So Shadi mentioned in an earlier slide that the funds for the lead service line replacement BIL program, a portion of those will be used for set-aside activities, and that's some pretty exciting new programs to potentially for the state to directly contract with some service providers to provide support with the inventory work. What I'm going to talk about is the funds that are going to be remaining and how we're going to be offering those through a competitive funding program similar to what we do for all of our other funds. An important note, though, is that because these funds are so focused on one type of activity, it gives us the ability to kind of separate those funds from our other funding programs and create a separate or a new funding program just for lead service line replacement. This will let lead service line replacement projects compete just with the other lead service line replacement projects. This also will allow us for a significantly more streamlined application process, prioritization process, and that'll also result in us being able to do more regular award cycles. Those of you familiar with our traditional SRF program, traditional funding programs, those are made available either twice per year or once per year, depending on the funding source. In theory, we will be able to award lead service line replacement funds at every one of our State Water Infrastructure Authority meetings. More to come on that as we finalize the intended use plan. So what is eligible for these projects? Shadi talked about the sum. Per EPA guidance, per the requirements for the program, activities must be lead service line replacement projects or activities directly connected to identification, planning, design, and replacement of lead service lines. So there's the flexibility to do both the actual construction type of work to replace the lines, as well as the inventories and getting out in the field and doing verification of whether the line construction is lead or not. Just as a reminder, if you have projects that are lead related that are not lead service line replacement or projects that would be eligible for the lead service line replacement funds, the DWSRF program likely covers that as an eligible cost, and we would encourage you to apply for funds in our twice per year funding cycles for those projects. Okay, important note, for replacement projects, you must replace the entire lead service line. A partial replacement would not be eligible for funding. The service line, as Shadi said, connects the water main to the building inlet. Those words are right out of the SRF bill implementation memo from EPA. That service line does include the connectors, the goosenecks, pigtails, whatever, that connect the service lines to the main. A lead service line also includes a portion of a line that may be galvanized, that would be downstream of the service line. There was a picture that Shadi showed earlier in the presentation. The galvanized service line downstream of lead. These funds, you would not have to replace portions that were previously replaced unless they were galvanized, which you would be doing. But if you have documentation that a portion of that service line had been previously replaced, you would not be required to replace the whole thing in order to be eligible for funding for the lead portion of that service line. And just as a note, these funds cannot be used for the in-house premise plumbing. Shadi mentioned that already. So this is just a diagram, no animation, nothing fancy, but it shows a depiction again of the service line. On the far left, you can see the water main in blue, and then in the gray, the service line owned by the system, a property boundary, meter, could be a curb stop, could be lots of things, but it's where the service line transitioned from being publicly owned to privately owned. That portion as well is part of the service line and would need to be replaced. And it goes all the way up to the building, referred to as premise plumbing. Inside the house or the premise plumbing is not eligible to be replaced with these funds. We can skip this slide. Shadi already covered it. Who's applicable for the funds? Let's start talking about loan terms. The bill lead service line replacement funds are state revolving funds, and they are traditionally loan funds. I'll talk a little bit in the next couple slides about this concept of principal forgiveness, but our base loan for these funds will be a 0% interest rate on the repayable loan portion. Typically, we have fairly good interest rates, 2-3%. For this program, everybody will receive that 0% interest rate. The loan terms cannot exceed the expected life of the project. So if you're doing a replacement project, we could have a loan term up to 20 years. For inventory projects, the base loan will be at 5 years. If you can demonstrate in the application and prior to taking on that debt, that your expected life of the project is greater than 5 years or different than 20 years, we can negotiate that. So principal forgiveness. Principal forgiveness is a portion of the loan that you don't have to pay back. We can't call it a grant. We call it principal forgiveness. It's a pretty great thing. Principal forgiveness, I don't think it's on here. 49% of the capitalization grant for lead service line replacement funds must be provided as additional subsidy or principal forgiveness. That's what we're going to do in North Carolina. So about half of the $80-some million will be awarded as principal forgiveness. What we do here in North Carolina is we look at 2 different factors to determine if a project is eligible for principal forgiveness. We look at the affordability criteria, which evaluates your community or utility as a whole. It considers community size, your rates, some economic indicators. It's all available online as part of our application process. And it comes up with a percent principal forgiveness eligibility. It ranges from 0 to 100% in 25% increments. Pretty straightforward. The other method is for projects that serve a disadvantaged area. I'll talk more about that in another slide, the next slide, I believe. But this process, it evaluates the residents benefiting from the project. And if certain criteria are met, that project would be eligible for 50% principal forgiveness. And it's 50% of the project costs, or percentage of the project costs in both of the affordability criteria and disadvantaged area evaluation. We do have an initial cap on the principal forgiveness that would be awarded to any project. It would be $500,000 or the eligible percentage, whichever is lower. We do this to try to spread the available principal forgiveness out to multiple projects. and to help out as many communities as we can with the portion of the loan not needing to be repaid. These caps can be exceeded if additional principal forgiveness funds are available for each of the funding rounds. So we would go over the $500,000 cap first in increments of up to $500,000. And if it's still funds are available, then we can go over the percent eligibility ranges as well. All right, let's talk a little bit about disadvantaged areas and this concept, which allows communities not otherwise eligible for principal forgiveness to document that, hey, this project is supporting a disadvantaged area and it should get some additional assistance for benefiting those residences. So for these projects, the application would need to document that at least 50% of the costs are benefiting a disadvantaged area. Disadvantaged area is ideally is usually a subsection or pocket of a service area. So it lets you kind of narrow down within your community or your service area to provide support. For this evaluation, your project size will be limited to half of the number of connections served by your utility at the time of application. Again, we have the affordability criteria, which looks at your entire service area, your entire community, and then this disadvantaged area concept, which allows you to narrow in to a targeted area. To show and document that the area being served is a disadvantaged area, we rely on you to provide a narrative that demonstrates that's a disadvantaged area. We use the same affordability criteria factors that are used in the affordability criteria, but those don't always get down or are available into a community or a home by home basis. So you can use other justification whether or not an area is disadvantaged. We've got a lot of guidance on that available in our guidance documents and in the IUP. As you prepare your application or project solicitation, you can get more information there. A great way to document that an area is disadvantaged is to use the department's community mapping system or other similar mapping tools to provide as supporting documentation. Okay, since this is state revolving funds, there are federal conditions that go with these funds that you need to be aware of. Davis-Bacon prevailing wage rates do apply. American Iron and Steel, that's a long-standing condition of the state revolving fund. This does apply to these projects. Very similar, but going a little bit more, is the Build America, Buy America requirements, or BABA. Those still apply to the lead service line replacement projects. There are some waivers and exceptions to these. Not going to get into those here. We'll talk a little bit more about Build America, Buy America. Since it's a newer requirement for the state revolving fund, and it would apply not only to all iron and steel that is produced in the United States, kind of an overlap with American iron and steel provisions, but it also requires that all manufactured products are produced in the United States, and all construction materials are manufactured in the United States. This may not impact lead service line replacement too significantly, but the material being used when you replace the service lines will be a consideration. A lot of information on the EPA website there, including some information on what types of projects can be waived from those requirements. All right, I'm going to hand it over to David now to talk a little bit more about some project specifics and the priority rating system. David.
Well, thank you, John. Well, let's look a little bit more in detail about what type of projects and the respective funding caps for them. So, the first type of project would be construction project replacing lead lines, lead service lines where they are known to exist. And the funding cap per round for that type of project is set at $4 million. The second type of project is a project where verification of unknown service line material needs to be done. And it would include also replacement of those service lines that are found, discovered to be lead. The cap for that is set at $2 million. And right now, we are in the process of considering possibility of limiting the cost of the material verification portion of that type of project, capping it at $500,000. The third type of project is just a pure inventory that service line with no replacement activities included. And that would be, the cap for that is set as $500,000. The three type of projects are also shown in the slide in order of decreasing priority. In other words, in our prioritization system, our intent is to give higher priority to the projects that aim at replacing the lead service line that are already known to be there, followed by, of course, verification and replacement and inventories. Now, in each round, water systems can apply for multiple type of projects. For example, verification and replacement and inventory, or also including replacement of lead service line. However, only one type of project per applicant will be funded, will receive funding per round. So you can have 3 different type of projects funded in the same round, but not 2 or more of the same type. And we're also considering adjusting the funding caps for these types of project prior to finalizing the IUP. We're receiving solicitation. We're in the process of receiving solicitation, and we're analyzing them in order to finalizing that decision about funding caps. Funding cycles or funding round. I think John mentioned earlier that our intent is to have more funding rounds per year that we normally have for our construction and other type of project. So right now we're considering for this year, 2023 calendar year, 3 rounds with due dates in June. They will still be considered solicitations by then. And then in August and in November. These are just tentative dates that are in the consideration. However, when we come to a determination of this, the due dates, we will announce them for everybody to know when the exact due dates are going to be. What do we do with this solicitation or applications? Well, if they receive by the announced due date, they will be reviewed, they will be scored for priority, and they will be considered for funding at the next scheduled meeting of the authority. As typical, North Carolina, if an application is not does not receive award for funding, is automatically reconsidered for the next funding round. Let's look at the priority rating system. This priority rating system has been approved by the State Water Infrastructure Authority last month in April. So it composed of 3 categories, priority categories. The first one, category 1, is for the project purpose. As I said earlier, there are 3 types of projects that eliminate lead service line, where the entirety of the project is to replace known lead service lines, or for verifying activities aimed at verifying the material of service line that are unknown material, and replacing those that are found verified to be lead. And the third one is for inventorying of service line with no replacement activities as part of the project. The second category of priority is the project benefits. There's only only two, and they address exceedance and known documented exceedances of lead action levels. So if a project addresses or resolves such an exceedance, it will get 5 points. If a project is in an area that the project area has documented or known action level exceedances, receives 2 points. The difference is that typically an inventory-only project would only qualify for the line item 2B, 2 points, whereas a project that involves replacement of lead service line will qualify for the higher points. The third and final category is the affordability category. There are three subcategories, A, B, and C. As John mentioned, affordability, principal forgiveness, eligibility for principal forgiveness can be determined based either on affordability criteria or the project benefiting disadvantaged area. So the first three subcategories or subsets of this category, A, B, and C, cover the affordability criteria of the applicants, of the systems, of the communities. And so you see there, number of residential connections, combined utility rates, and local government unit indicators. We have added to the category 4C points for projects that benefits disadvantaged area as an alternative to local government unit indicators points, meaning these points are primarily intended for those applicants that may not qualify for points under LGU indicators criteria, and they would still have a chance at earning affordability points if the project benefit disadvantaged areas as John has described earlier. This slide shows the front page of the solicitation form. Right now, we can only show you a solicitation form. Application form is not being finalized for the reason described before. It's very similar. Some of you will recognize it because it's pretty much it's almost identical to the application form that we use for our traditional funding programs. Where can you find this form? Well, you can download it from our website, and solicitation can be submitted at any time. Of course, as I said earlier, solicitation that are received before the due date that we will establish tentatively around June will be considered for the next available meeting of the authority. So again, right now, we're accepting project solicitation, not application. However, a project solicitation that is submitted will be considered as an application when the intended use plan and the applications are application for the service line replacement funding are finalized. So a solicitation will include is required to include signatures by the authorized representative, a budget, and a narrative supporting the claims for priority points. The solicitation is not required to be submitted with a resolution by the governing board and a fund transfer certification. However, if you already have an available resolution submitting along with the solicitation, you won't have to submit it again later. So another aspect that the difference between solicitation and application is that a solicitation can still be improved upon, meaning if you desire to update the project information with different budget numbers or other project information, while, before the solicitation return application, you can still do so. And also, if we should, in finalizing the application, should introduce new requirements, you can submit the additional information so that the application will meet those requirements. So, the applications, of course, will be scored with based on the priority rating system, and will be considered for funding and presented to the authority based on their priority scoring. So based on a priority order. If an application will be awarded funding, the division will issue a letter of intent to fund that will spell out the project milestones along with due dates, or if the project is for inventory only, it will have an alternate project schedule. This because we realize that a construction project, a replacement project, would definitely have different type of milestones and requirements than an inventory only product. Once the award is made and a letter of intent to fund is sent to the recipient, we will follow up with a funding offer that includes all the funding terms and conditions that has to be executed, signed, and returned to us. If the funding includes a loan portion, a repayable loan portion, the local government commission must approve the loan portion of that award. And the division for replacement project that include construction contracts will issue an authority to award. So with that, I think the next is John again.
Yeah, thanks, David. So what's going on? What are the next steps for getting this from the solicitation phase and getting project information to actually turning these into applications and getting some funds awarded? First, thanks for all the comments we're seeing. We're scrambling, trying to write these all down so we can get some answers to you as best we can. And I think you'll see that some of it is really still in flux, and we're trying to make sure that we've got as complete of a project and program ready for you when we roll it out and turn these into applications. Okay, so thank you for the solicitation forms, and please continue to submit those solicitation forms. I'll probably say that 3 more times before I'm done speaking. So as we get those in, since it's not an application, there may be some follow-up from our staff to try to get some more clarification and to try to make sure that when that solicitation is turned into is ready to be an application, that that project is the best represented and can compete as well as it can as an application. And we're going to continue to update, if necessary, that form and to create a final application form. So our plan is to have everything ready to go so that we can apply to EPA for these funds in July of 2023. And if we can do that, which we are on schedule to do, the funds are expected to be available as early as this fall, and that's real dollars to communities. What we need to do is we need to finalize the intended use plan and that application process for you all. First, thank you again for the comments that we received during the public review of the intended use plan and priority rating systems. Those are very helpful. We continue to evaluate those comments and are trying to see where we can make the program better and improve the intended use plan to get these funds out to the communities. Some of the areas that we are trying to finalize details on is this differentiation potentially between doing an inventory work for meeting the lead and copper rule revisions versus the verification step of when you're going in to an area that is unknown or suspected to be lead and doing potholing or other methods to verify whether that line is in fact lead and needing replacement. We got a lot of comments on how to make sure that the inventories are funded and inventories go forward for communities trying to meet that lead and copper rule revision. Again, great comments. David mentioned a change in the priority rating system that resulted for that, but we're looking for other things, potentially in the IUP, funding caps, and maybe some other mechanisms to make sure that the inventories, we're supporting communities that want to do that inventory work, and we can get that done prior to the October 2024 deadline. Funding caps, I mentioned that already. Principal forgiveness, talked earlier about the affordability criteria and a disadvantaged area consideration. The whole point of the principal forgiveness is to get that additional subsidy, to get that great part of our program to those communities, those residents most in need. So we're looking at that a little bit more closely to see if there's any changes that need to be made. David already talked about the funding cycles, figuring out what are the reasonable funding cycles for this CAP grant, the 2022 funds, as well as the next 4 years of funds, how to make that available, and how to make it transparent to you all with how much loan money we think would be awarded, how much principal forgiveness would be awarded along with those loan funds, so that you can kind of predict, at least at a minimum, how much is going to be awarded. And then certainly if we don't get enough applications for those funds, that those funds would immediately be available for the next funding rounds or future funding rounds. Applications, looking at the solicitation form, is that really the information that we need to evaluate these projects, to score them, prioritize them, and get them in front of the authority for recommendations for funding? We're really focusing on trying to keep the applications simple and remove unnecessary items. One thing to throw out is we got a lot of comments on whether or not a professional engineering seal is necessary as part of the application. I think we're going to see that we're not going to require it for inventories, and we're continuing to look at whether or not we're comfortable taking away that PE seal requirement for more of the construction type of projects. And a key component of this, and this is really our problem more than it is your problem, but the project list that goes in the intended use plan is really important for us to be able to have access quickly to the lead service line replacement funds. We have to demonstrate the need in our funding application so that EPA can award us those funds, and then we can get those to you all for your projects. So please continue to submit the project solicitation forms. That's what we're going to be using to generate the project list for an intended use plan. And again, EPA will only award North Carolina funds for documented demand. So it's really important and really helpful to all of us that you submit those forms. The last slide that I have is contact information. David and Amanjit have been our leads for the lead service line replacement funding program. I'm there. Kavitha Ambikadevi is another one of our supervisors with the drinking water program. And then, of course, we include Kathy as our public information officer. You can contact any of us, and we'll do the best to answer your questions. We did get some questions in the chat about whether or not this presentation will be available online. Yes, it will be put on our website so that you'll have this contact information as well as all of the other slides for you if you want to do any follow-up. And with that, I think we can open it up to, well, we'll start going through the questions. Shadi, do you?
Well, I'll just add also that we're recording this webinar, so we'll be posting the recording of the webinar as well, alongside the presentation. John, David, thank you for that presentation. So I understand I cannot see the chat myself, but I understand we have some questions in the chat. I'll ask Jen to
Sure.
read one or two.
Sure. The first one is, has North Carolina previously received any federal funding for lead service lines from the bill?
So no, we have not yet had the bill lead service line funding from federal government yet, from US EPA. But this is what we are doing right now. We're finalizing the intended use plan and the capitalization grant for the first year of the 5 years of funding. And that's what we're working towards. We need to be submitting that application this summer.
Who do we submit the solicitation forms to?
I can take that one. So when you're on the website, I think Kathy had provided in the chat a link to where you can get the project solicitation form. When you're filling that out, there's a link in that form that says to submit the form. You go to a specific web page. That web page is also on our website as well, but there's an online submittal. So once you're completed your project solicitation form along with the supporting narrative, then you would go on that link. It's an online form that you'd fill out that form. You'd attach those documents as PDFs and you hit submit. So you don't have to email it, you don't have to mail it. And we do take those year round. There is no hard deadline. And I just want to clarify, take this opportunity here to clarify that project solicitation form has a May 1 date listed on it. That was not a hard deadline for folks. That was you'll still see it there. We're going to probably revise the project solicitation form and remove it because we're now taking those year round on a recurring basis. So even if you see May 1 on that form right now, don't worry about it. Please go ahead and submit your project solicitation. John, you want to add something?
Yeah, you just had said that the solicitation form would be available year round. When we turn it into an application, that solicitation form will go away. It'll be a formal application process. And that way you'll know when you met that requirement. It'll be a live application for consideration for funding.
Yep, thank you for clarifying. So it's a project solicitation until we turn it into an application form, and then the application form will be available and will be taken year round. We have another question?
Yes, 1 minute. Let me see. What do you consider to be the end of the line to the home?
Well, relying on the EPA's guidance, it is the building. We do have some verbal communication with EPA, but not in writing, of the ability to go to an isolation valve or to a connection point that makes sense. Of course, that's not very, very clear yet. We're certainly hoping to get more clarification from EPA on how far in we can go and still be eligible for funding.
Okay. Where will, I guess, you get authorization to make improvements on the private property with public funds? We know that we will get blamed for anything that goes wrong for the property on the next 100 years.
Yeah, that's a really good question too. That's another one of those ones we're looking for certainty on. Certainly, the only certainty is that you as a community need to do what you're comfortable doing and what you're comfortable providing. Work with your own attorney on making that, figuring out what you're comfortable doing. The funds are clear. You have to replace the entire lead service line to be eligible for these funds. You cannot make the homeowner do this work. So it needs to be an agreement between you and that landowner residence that this work is going to be done. If you have any more to add on that.
No, I think you covered it right. I mean, that's the requirement. We know that's a sticky point, not just for North Carolina, but in other states as well. We're hearing the same concern, and it really does come down to the utility working with the homeowners and having some agreement to be able to do that work. What we just have to make sure that the funds can be used for what the funds what's allowable. And again, as John explained, funds can only be used if you're replacing the entire lead service line up to the home. But we can't force you to do that. We can't force the homeowners to do that work. So if you can't get to that point, you wouldn't be able to use the funds for that service line. If you wanted to only do replacement on the public side up to the meter, then that would not be eligible for this lead service line funding. But of course, you can cover that cost on your own.
Can these BIL funds be used to replace the private side of the service line, since water providers are required to offer to replace but not pay for replacing the private side? This gets very sticky because it's not like we can create sub-loan documents for every service line replaced.
Not sure if we've already answered that question with the previous question. So the first part of the question was asking whether or not these lines can be used to replace the private side of the lead service line. The answer is yes. It has to be the private side has to be included in the entire service line replacement. So if you're incurring costs to replace the private side of the lead service line, that will be an eligible expense under lead service line funding. Yes. Not sure if there was a second part of that question that I didn't answer. Yeah, okay. If we did not fully answer that question, whoever submitted, if you want to follow up with a follow-up question, that would be helpful. Thank you.
If awarded, can we use these grants to hire a contractor to perform the pipe identification?
Yes.
Under what statutory authority will the utility be allowed to conduct construction line replacement on private property?
Goes back to the same response that you heard from John. It's I'm not sure that we can give you an answer to that question right now, and we're looking into that, but I would suggest, just like John, work with your town attorneys to try to address that. Now, you could also look at voluntary options as well.
What are the due dates for solicitations, et cetera, again?
So there is not a due date on the solicitation forms. I'll encourage you to get them in as quickly as you can, because it helps ensure that we'll be able to apply for the most funds that we can from EPA to make them available to everybody. When we transition to an application process, there will be due dates for those, just to ensure that the staff have time to prioritize and get our recommendations ready for the State Water Infrastructure Authority. However, if you miss that deadline, you can the next application round would start immediately. So it would just be considered at the next authority meeting.
Right. And to follow up, I think it was David that presented this slide that mentions June, August, and November. These are the dates that are right before the SWIA meeting. So that's kind of what John was saying. August, November, the applications will be due in August and November. The June solicitation, solicitations will be accepted any time, but if you submit them by June, we can try to get that in front of SWIA before the next cycle.
Okay. I think you will find that the majority of the water lines into the house are hard piped to the meter from the interior of the house hot water tank. If this is the case, where would the cut be made? Past the meter to the house if allowed?
Yeah, we almost need to look at those on a case-by-case basis to see what we can approve as the project cost.
All right. See, when do funds need to be used by? If a town is completing its inventory now and wishes to solicit upon a preliminary evaluation, can they wait until the inventory is completed?
You can provide your solicitation form at any time. And similarly, when we have applications for funding, you potentially could do any of them at any time. Although to do a known lead replacement project, you will need to show documentation of how you know that it's lead. So it kind of lends itself to doing the inventory work that's part of the lead and copper rule revision requirement first. Then potentially eliminating those that are known to be lead, and at the same time working on verification, identification in those unknown areas, replacing those as you find them.
I want to take opportunity here to bring up the inventories required under the lead copper revised rule, the LCRR, versus funding available for inventories. If you have questions about the lead and copper revised rule, that October 24 deadline and that preliminary inventory that you have to complete as a public water system by October 24, definitely follow all the information that's being provided by the public water supply section of the Division of Water Resources. They will tell you exactly what you need to do and what they will approve. That's the agency, that's the department or the division that's working on that. These funds can help you administer or try to complete those preliminary inventories, but it can also go beyond that. The lead and copper revised rule focuses really on the lead service lines themselves, but the funding can be used to identify lead goosenecks and pigtails, which goes a little bit beyond the preliminary inventories as well. And that's maybe what you'll find in some of the systems as well. You may not have lead service lines, but you may have goosenecks and pigtails that are made of lead, or galvanized lines downstream of lead as well. So keep that in mind. And also, inventorying does not necessarily mean you have to verify every single line. You don't have to go potholing every line to identify whether or not the materials are lead. But if that is what you intend to do, then again, these funds are available. But keep that scope in mind when you're thinking about what you're looking for funding assistance.
Okay, last question that I've got right now, is there any consideration to make inventory only projects eligible for full principal forgiveness? Most communities are not going to take a loan for this type of work.
Yeah, we get that. There's only so much principal forgiveness that we have with this, with the funds, and there needs to be some loan component, even in order to make that principal forgiveness available. So we really need some communities willing to take on the low interest loan. That's one of the reasons why the decision was made to offer 0% interest loan for all of these funds. Yeah, we wish it was all principal forgiveness.
And as a reminder, we do have some set asides coming out of the lead service line replacement funding, and we are intending to use some of those set asides to help conduct inventories in water systems that need it the most, and that would not be at any charge to the water system as well. So that's outside of the application process for this funding.
What is being done for homeowners that are still on private wells? We still have a lot of private well homeowners in our county.
Yeah, unfortunately, this funding is not it's not eligible to use these funds to do anything with private wells. This funding specifically is about lead service lines, so it's connections between distribution lines of a water system and the homes. So it's not even there to provide connections. Now, if you have communities that are on individual wells that are contaminated and they're looking to connect to a water system, our regular base drinking water state revolving fund, as well as some of our other funding programs, the Community Development Block Grant infrastructure program that we have, can provide either loans or grants to provide connections to homes that are on individual wells. But none of the funds that we administer are to repair individual homeowner wells without a connection to public water. All the funding that we administer is for public water systems.
Is the relocation of meters and service lines eligible for funding? For example, those meters on lead lines are not currently located at the edge of private property, or correction of those or other bad existing configurations.
Yeah, so the replacement of the lead service line from the main until the house is eligible. So that means you have to change some of the locations of things in between, that would be eligible.
Another thing that people might need to know is that landscaping costs are also eligible. So if you're digging up private side and replacing the line, then the costs to repair the lawn or whatever is also an eligible expense.
Is principal forgiveness going to be all distributed at the beginning or throughout the funding process?
Throughout the funding process. The idea is we'll be able to advertise how much total funding would be available for each funding cycle, and then also advertise with that how much principal forgiveness would be available. It's not a 49% percentage basis. It's unfortunately a little more complicated than that. It's more than 49%.
And I know that we're right at time, so you might be able to take one more question and we'll end it here. But we are keeping track of the chat, so if we have not answered your question, we'll try to follow up with you if you maybe provide your contact information or reach back out to us. I'll put our contact information up here as well on the screen. One more question, Jen.
For these solicitations to be considered for funding, must we only offer to replace the private side, or is it required that we actually do the replacements? That will make a huge difference in the cost of projects.
So if I'm hearing correctly, is just making the offer to replace the private side, and if the homeowner says no, would you be eligible to then do the public side and use our funding for that? The answer would be no.
Yeah, and if another scenario that I think may be the question is, if you are going to require the homeowner to pay for their process, for their part of it, and it does get done at the same time as the project, is your costs eligible on the public side? And that's complicated, but I believe it is. We would just need to make verification that the entire service line was replaced.
All right. Well, thank you all very much and appreciate all the questions that we're getting. Again, we'll try to follow up, or please feel free to reach out to anybody that you see on this list here. Thank you to John, David, Jen, Kathy for assisting with the webinar. We will try to finalize the intended use plan and make that public as quickly as possible. As soon as we have that in the application forms, we'll be posting those as well. And we'll be following up with everybody who's already submitted a project solicitation form. If you already have and you still have some more projects, go ahead and submit some more. For those that have not yet submitted project solicitations, please go ahead and submit that as well. But we'll be reaching out to all those that have projects and are interested in the funding as well. With that, thank you very much.